Good evening, and welcome to the second in a series presented by Oorah's Rebbetzins Shadchan program. Please feel free to help yourselves to any of the food or drinks. As they say, everything is on the house, or perhaps more accurately tonight, everything is in the house. We find ourselves in the strangest of times. Rabbanim, the rabbis, are telling us that it's Ikvasa the Mashiach. Mashiach is on the way and he's quite close. I believe that with a full heart. The airwaves, video conferencing, phone calls are all full of tremendous amounts of Chizuk. The Rabbanim are giving us tremendous Torah insights and Chidushim. They're teaching us halachos of how we should live during this period of time, how we should prepare for Pesach, which is coming up upon us so quickly. There are a lot of different places, and I'm sure you're all familiar with them, and you probably have been on them over the past few days. But you clicked on here tonight for something just a little bit different. There are many places that you could go for Torah Chizuk, but you've come here for something a little bit different. According to the ad that was sent out to announce this particular program, the title was Practical Chizuk for Dating During Social Distancing. Also on that ad, I noticed that they called me a renowned lecturer and educator. That was some very interesting news to hear. And now that I know that I am, I'd like to take the opportunity to try to fulfill the mission that was given to me. My father, Zatzal, who was a Rav in a shul for all the years, used to say, a Yid, a Jew, could learn from anything that Hashem put into this world. And often when he spoke at a bar mitzvah or at a bris or at an afruf, he would mention this, and he would say, we can even learn from something as simple as a soda bottle. Now, I have to give you a little bit of a history lesson, because today we have a bottle law which requires us to return the bottles, and we get a deposit. We get 5 cents back when we return it. But that law that is in place today began about 37 years ago in 1983. Prior to that, when I was just a little boy, there was a period of time for about, 20 or 30 years that there was no deposit required and there was nothing returned to you when you gave back the bottle. And on every bottle, I don't know if the right word is inscribed because it wasn't etched in, but it was in the glass itself, maybe embossed is a better word. It was called a bottle mark. You can still see them on some bottles. And on the bottle, it said in big capital letters, no deposit, no return. And my father, Over Shalom, used to say to the people celebrating the Simcha, you see what we can learn from a soda bottle? Every investment requires a deposit. Without a deposit, if you don't put anything in, you don't take anything out. We'll get back to that vart in a little while. But the point is, my father said, you can learn from everything, and I would guess we could say from everybody that Hashem puts in this world. And therefore, I'd like to use my hero, not really my hero, but my hero for quotes, a fellow by the name of Yogi Berra. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Yogi Berra. He only died about 5 years ago, but his professional career ended about 55 years ago. Yogi Berra was a professional baseball player. He was a catcher, and then he became a manager and a coach. 19 years in the big leagues. Most of those years, I think all of those years except for one, he was on the New York Yankees. And as famous as Yogi Berra may have been for his baseball prowess, he was much more famous for his unbelievable quotes. He used to get a little tongue-tied and mixed up in the things that he said. Some of his more famous quotes that he said, something like, we made too many wrong mistakes. Or no one goes there nowadays, it's too crowded. And one of my favorites, he used to tell the team, pair up in threes. So Yogi Berra had a penchant for mixing things up. But if we're in an upside down world today, maybe we could use Yogi Berra to help us reach the practical chizuk that we're looking for in our social distance dating. Yogi Berra said, first quote, if you don't know where you're going, you might end up somewhere else. Now, this actually makes a little bit of sense. It would apply even in normal times, but certainly today, if we're going to be dating in a situation where it's very much concentrated, one-on-one, we don't have any distractions that we could look to when there's an awkward silence. We're not walking in the park and we're not going out to eat and we're not watching a show, a kosher show. We're basically concentrating on each other, and an awkward silence could sometimes be very difficult to tolerate. And so let's take Yogi's advice. If you don't know where you're going, you may end up somewhere else. So know where you're going. I think Yogi is suggesting that we make a plan. More important now than ever, if we're going to be talking on the phone or we're going to be doing a video conference, there's nothing wrong with having a plan, having some notes of things that you want to discuss, things that you could use. Perhaps there should be a plan A and even a plan B, so that in case it's not working out so well, we could switch to something else. Now, of course, if Hashem is good to us and the conversation is just flowing, then let it flow. But if it's not, be prepared. Know where you're going so that you don't end up somewhere else. Yogi was also very prophetic. Now, I don't want to say he was a prophet because basically what he said was dumb, but it turns out to be prophetic. Second quote from Mr. Berra, the future ain't what it used to be. Now, of course, when he said it, it made no sense. But today, we have to think of this man as a genius. He was so right. After the situation that we find ourselves in today, and may Hashem remove it from us as soon and as painlessly as possible. But I don't think any of us will ever think of the future in the way we may have thought of it before, maybe as little as a week or two ago. I think this situation, besides showing us that Mashiach is so close, has told us certain things about the values and the importance of things that we used to look to in the future that perhaps today don't carry so much weight. I refer to the glitz and the glitter, the wealth and the extravagance, the high and the mighty. I don't mean chas v'shalom, our Torah giants, but lahavdil, our political people, our celebrities, all of the things that perhaps, and I include myself in the mix, perhaps we once thought that these were important things. We aspired to great wealth. We aspired to unbelievable prominence. We looked for things that would be in our future that today we realize are so unimportant. How important could they be if a tiny microbe could make a healthy person gasp for breath? How important could it be if we can't walk out of the doors of our home? We can't go to shul to daven. We can't go to work. And you'll excuse me, but this is in all the news. We can't even purchase bathroom tissue, no matter how stuffed our wallets are with cash. So I think that we have a different perspective now of the future and what's important and what we're looking forward to. And when we're talking now on a date, on the phone, on a video conference, I'm sure the first topic that will come up is, so what have you been doing while you've been stuck inside? I mean, what else could be a topic of relevance? And let's analyze what we hear from the other side. Are we dealing with somebody that's shallow and they're looking through their old baseball card collection, or they're changing the color of their nail polish? Or are they taking the time now to reconnect with old friends, to check on family, maybe do some shiurim online, maybe learn a new language, something that would show us that a person has teichen, has some content, there's something there that's important and they're not wasting their time. At other times in the past, we may have overlooked some of these things. But today, with the situation that we're in, if we're dating with social distancing, this may be a perfect opportunity to hone in on the real things, the things that we really want to see in a potential life partner. Yogi Berra also said, we have a good time together even when we're not together. Of course, when he said it, it didn't make any sense. But today, he couldn't be more right. We are suffering. I shouldn't say that. We are involved in social distancing. We are apart physically, but we've been drawn together emotionally and on every other level. It's incredible how our community has come together, the caring and the warmth that we see all around us, children for their parents, neighbors. We've had calls. We've had neighbors that called us and asked us, is there anything we could get you? We're going to the store. It's beautiful. Hatzalah, who always does awesome things for the community, are going well beyond the call of duty to be there for anybody that needs them. There are young people worried about the old people. There are old people worried about the young people. The doctors and the nurses in the hospital, the people that are in places that are there only to help other people. It's incredible how much coming together is based on our social distancing. Perhaps we could say, on a much lighter level, that the same should be for a socially distant date. We can have a good time together, even if we aren't together. Again, it goes back to the planning. Maybe there's something that we could do, maybe not on a first date, but maybe on a second or a third date, where we can work on a game or an activity, where we could have fun, we could enjoy, we could have a good time together, even though we're not together. One thing's for sure. As we prepare for our future lives, and of course that includes preparing for Mashiach's imminent arrival, the Gemara tells us that the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam. And the third and final Beis HaMikdash, the Geula Shalema, will come based on Ahavas Chinam. When we love our fellow Jew, when we love our fellow just because he is our fellow, that's what's going to bring Mashiach. The coronavirus has done a very good job. Obviously, it was the Eibishter that sent the coronavirus that has done a very good job in bringing us together, in improving our Avas Chinam, in making us think of other people, perhaps even before ourselves. But I'd like to share with you, if I may, a short story that sends the message of Avas Chinam home like no other message can. This story is a true story. It took place in 1973. I had just finished high school and I went to Israel to study in a yeshiva. I was very young. Went to study in a yeshiva. I got there in September of 1973, and those of you that are familiar with our history, in the state of Israel, there was a war called the Yom Kippur War. It broke out as we were davening Musaf on Yom Kippur. Of course, we were American kids. What did we know? The Israeli kids certainly knew a lot more than us, and they were scared, and they made us scared. We were told by the yeshiva, no ben azmanim, you can't go out on vacation, certainly not when the situation is so dire. What we did do is we volunteered to help the war effort. And my job, little 16-year-old boy, I was sent to the bakery, and I was packing bread to send to the front. And that's where I heard this story. Again, if you're familiar with the history in the Yom Kippur War, things did not start off very well. The Israeli army was caught unaware, and there were, Rahman Litzlan, many casualties when the war began. And on one of the first days of the war, deep in the Sinai desert, down south, one of the soldiers, unfortunately, stepped on a mine and was blown to death. His face was recognizable, but not much else of him was. And his ID tag, which for some unknown reason they call dog tags, but his ID tag was blown away from his body and only a small portion remained. And on that small portion, it had his last name. But his last name was Levi. Who knows how many Levis there were deployed to the Sinai Desert during those first days of the war. And we're not talking today, we're talking 47 years ago. Computer systems weren't where they were today. And they brought this body, Nebuch, back to Be'er Sheva, which was the closest space. And they were trying to figure out what to do. They wanted to notify the family. They wanted to allow this body to be brought to Oorah as soon as possible. But what should they do? They didn't even know which family he belonged to. All they knew was Levi. And so after a quick and thorough search of whatever records they had, they found that there were 8 Levis that were deployed to the Sinai Desert. And the decision was made. We need to call all 8 families. And they'll have to come down to Beersheba, and somebody is gonna have to identify this poor soldier. And that's what they did. They made 8 phone calls that morning, and they called 8 families, and they told them, we don't know for sure, but there's a possibility, a small possibility, but there's a possibility that your son was the one who was killed in the Sinai Desert. And we ask you to please come to Beersheba to attempt to identify the body. And slowly they began coming. Beersheba is not so close to mid-Israel or northern Israel, and they were families that came from far. It took them a few hours, and they started arriving. The first family came, and you could see how desperate they were and how scared they were and how nervous they were. And the sergeant met them and explained to them what they were going to do. And they sympathized. They said, we know how difficult this is, but we want to make sure that we know who this poor soldier is. Could you please go into that room and take a look? And they went into the room, and within seconds, they were out. They said, no, that's not our son. Then the second family came, and again, they went through the whole procedure. They spoke to them, they warned them, they sympathized with them, and asked them to go into the room, and they went in, and again, seconds later, they came out. And the same for the third, and the same for the fourth. And then the fifth family came. But it wasn't really a family. It was an elderly gentleman, a Holocaust survivor, who came to Eretz Yisrael after the war, got married, and had 2 sons. His first son died during the 6-Day War, 6 years earlier in 1967. His wife passed on just a year before after a prolonged illness. He had 1 son. That was his entire family. He had no parents. He had no brothers or sisters. He had no other children. This was his one and only son. And now it was questionable whether his son was lying on the stretcher in the other room. And the sergeant explained to him again, we don't know for sure, there's a chance that it might be your son. Can you please go in there and take a look? Mr. Levy says, yes, I will. And he goes into the room. And Mr. Levy doesn't come back out. And the seconds tick by, and then the minutes tick by. And after 5 minutes, which is an awful long time when you're waiting for somebody to come out of a room, which should have taken 10 seconds, the sergeant looks at the lieutenant, and the lieutenant looks at the sergeant, and they lift the curtain, they look in, and they see Mr. Levy just standing there. He's just standing there. And they said, what should we do? So give him another few minutes. And they gave him another couple of minutes, but he's just standing there. And the sergeant says, I'm going to go in. And he goes, he says, Mr. Levy, I know how difficult this is for you. Can I help you? And Mr. Levy says, no, give me a moment. Give me a moment. I'm going to do it. And the sergeant leaves him alone, goes back out. And again, they wait a minute or 2 or 3 or 4, and nothing happens. And they're peeking in, and they see Mr. Levy is still standing in the same place. He hasn't lifted the sheet. He hasn't looked. And the sergeant goes back in, and he says, Mr. Levy, I know how hard this is for you. Please let me help you. Let's go together, and let's take a look. And Mr. Levy says, that's not it. He says, what do you mean it's not it? He says, I had a long trip here, and I've already made up my mind that if this is my son who sacrificed his life on behalf of Klal Yisrael, then I accept what God has given me, and I will live with it. And the sergeant is looking at this old man, the strength of this old man. And he says, Mr. Levy, then why haven't you looked? And Mr. Levy looks up at the sergeant. He says, Sergeant, I'm just thinking, if it's not my son, am I allowed to be happy? If it's not my son, it's somebody else's son. The Ahavas Chinam of Mr. Levy is incredible. Hashem should watch over us and protect us from ever coming to any type of anguish like Mr. Levy did. But it's a level of Ahavas Chinam that we should aspire to. Imagine a world where people think about other people's feelings and put them before their own. What a world that would be. That's going to be the world that's going to bring Mashiach. And that, my friends, is what we're looking for in a soulmate. Someone who will have the Ahavas Chinam for all Jews, and certainly as a soulmate to put their feelings second to the feelings of their loved ones. Let me close by going back to the Vart of my father, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha. My father actually got smicha in Shanghai, China, during World War II. That's where he escaped to, with no family, with no one but his yeshiva buddies. Ended up in Shanghai, and that's where he married my mother. That's where he got smicha. When he came to this country, he was a Rav for all the years, and he had a very special relationship with young people. It's now going on 37 years. In fact, 2 weeks from yesterday will be his 37th yahrzeit on Yud Gimel Nisan. The way things look right now, I doubt that I'm going to be getting an aliyah on the yahrzeit, and I doubt that we'll have the opportunity to say Kaddish. So perhaps this could be a zechus for him. My father used to say, no deposit, no return. In Yiddish, he used to translate as melek nicht arein, nimmt man nicht arois. If you don't invest, you don't get back. If you don't make an effort, you're not going to have any kind of results. But by the same token, the greater the effort, the greater the results. What a chizuk, what a lesson for all of us in all aspects of life. But certainly as we're dating, and certainly as we're dating in a situation such as we find ourselves in today, it's going to take some effort. It's going to take some effort to wait, because much as our shadchanim really want to help you, and it never leaves their mind for a moment what they can do to help our singles and try to pair them and marry them off. But everybody's in a difficult situation now. People have families, people are preparing for Pesach. It may not go as quickly as we'd like it. So it's going to take some effort to wait, and then, Be'ezras Hashem, some effort to date. Don't give up. Don't say it's too hard. Don't say I'll wait a year. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about getting to it, making the deposit, and getting the return. Perhaps I should have started with this last quote of Yogi's, but I'm going to end with it. Yogi Berra said, the first thing I should do is thank everybody who made this day necessary. Well, Oorah didn't make the day necessary, but Oorah certainly knows what is necessary for the day. We have to thank them for always being at the forefront, helping Klal Yisrael. This Zoom presentation is just a small cog in a great machine, a machine that works tirelessly on behalf of our people. I'd like to thank Rabbi Leifer, Mrs. Sarah Browski, who run the Rebbetzins program. I'm honored to have been asked to participate. I thank you all for listening, and may Hashem hear our tefillos. May Hashem see our coming together while we're staying apart. And may He grant all of us, and especially you, smachot bekarov, simchas soon, and the greatest simcha of it all, the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mehera b'yameinu, amen v'amen. It's my honor to introduce the next speaker, a wonderful and talented man. I know he was an excellent student in the 7th grade because I was his English and history teacher. And he's only gone on, Mechayel El Choyel, to excel in everything that he does. It's my privilege to introduce Rabbi Mayer Zuckerman.
Thank you, Rabbi Portowicz, for your words of wisdom, and also thank you for that introduction. Just to say who I am, what I do, I am a licensed clinical social worker, an LCSW in private practice in Lakewood, New Jersey. I'm also a professor of social work, and I work a lot with singles and with people who are dating. So this is an area of focus of mine. And I thank Oorah for putting together the program and for asking me to participate. I think that my role is going to be to be more practical and pragmatic in the current situation and dating. So I want to first begin by saying that we are in an evolving situation. I reviewed today the video of last week's presentation, and it was interesting to see the switch from what was being said from the perspective of the situation then, the medical situation. People were talking about going out on dates. I live in Lakewood, New Jersey. Currently, we're told to shelter in place. We're not going out at all. I can't imagine in the current situation people actually physically meeting to have a date, to just, at least where I am, and I know that this is also dependent on your geography, but at least where I am, that is not even an option. So that leaves us with a couple of choices to make. And just before we even get to that actual choice, we should just acknowledge and notice what we are going through. Because we are sheltering in place, it leaves us in a situation where in many ways we're removed from our regular world. And because of that, although there's also the positive of being able to focus on the spiritual aspect, et cetera, but there's a very practical result that our minds are not really as clear sometimes. Sometimes we get lost in a loop. How many WhatsApp status updates have you done? How many snaps have you had? How many times did you view the news? How many memes did you receive? And so we get caught in a loop, and it's not a very healthy place to be as we're considering dating somebody else, because our mind is now isolated somewhere. There's also a practical reality that when we're doing social distancing, to a certain extent, we're also being isolated, and there's nothing worse for a human being than loneliness. The way I always talk about this, and the reason why I'm talking about it also partially is because I recognize that some singles probably are living either with family or roommates, and some singles may be living alone. And loneliness is a terrible feeling. Unfortunately, people who are single, especially if they're single and they're a little bit older, they often experience loneliness. It's the most painful thing a person could experience. The way I illustrated, I talk about a person in Siberia. The person is freezing, they're starving, they're being beaten, and they're being worked to death. If the guard wants to punish them, they put them into solitary confinement. Because being alone, being lonely, is worse than freezing and starving and being beaten and worked to death. So as we are in this situation, and then we find ourselves sort of getting caught in the loop of our mental processes, or the things that we're doing. Some of us are still working from home. Some of us are not, and we get caught in this place, which may not be such a healthy place. And so therefore, as you're considering dating, realize that you're going to have to break out. You're going to have to overcome this. You're going to have to reset yourself. And the best way to do that is before you date, to consciously tell yourself, okay, I need to get myself into the zone. I need to get myself into that mindset that allows me to date. So the first question is, should you date or should you not date? I've spoken to people. Some people have said that they intend to continue on dating because the reality is we could be in this situation that we're in now, it could go on for months, and they don't want to put their dating life on hold. Other people have said that dating via camera and video just is so difficult for them. They're not comfortable with that way of interacting with people, and particularly in the instance of dating where it's making such an important decision, they don't feel they could be natural. They don't feel they could get a proper sense of the other person, and therefore they would like to put their dating on hold. Either decision could be the right one. It has to be the right one for you. That may be based on your own sense of things. You could also talk that over with a mentor. The Rebbetzins program has mentors that could help you in making this decision. Or you could talk it over with whichever person you tend to discuss these types of decisions. But either decision can be correct. I'm going to talk about both ways, but I'm going to start with the dating part of it, because that's really our focus is current dating in the current climate. Then I'll cover more broadly, if I have time, just dating in general, which will also speak to the situation of those who are going to choose to put their dating on hold. So again, whenever we're dating, whenever we're looking into a particular person, whenever we're choosing to date a particular person, we have to put our full mind into that. It's terrible. Sometimes I speak to people and they're considering dating one person and they're also like sort of just tasting, and I'll just get a little sense of this other one. And they're trying to skim sort of in their dating. And what happens is that they're not fully involved with person A, they're not fully involved with person B. So the result is that neither of those situations can work. Whichever person that you're considering dating, you have to be into them 100%. As difficult as it is sometimes to hope, you have to walk into the situation with the hope, this is the one, this is the person I'm going to marry. And then, of course, you have to evaluate to see, is that the person? But the mindset has to be, I'm totally involved. In the same way, even though in today's world, in today's current situation, it may be difficult to get yourself totally focused, but you have to be totally focused on, this is what I'm doing, and I need to get my head in the game. Keep in mind that regardless of whether we're doing this dating on a shidduch date where we're meeting in person or a shidduch date being done online, it is an awkward situation. We're supposedly going to be totally ourselves in a situation where it's totally not us. The whole situation is very uncomfortable to begin with. Nevertheless, it's especially important if you're going to be dating via video conferencing. I'm going to use the word Zoom as shorthand for video conferencing. It's a shorter word. If you're FaceTiming, if you're using any other platform, it's all the same. So we're going to talk about dating in the Zoom world. So number one, there are very positive aspects. We could look at it in a very positive sense. First of all, you don't need to find a place to go. You don't need to find a place to park. You don't need to travel, so you're saving travel time. That's true generally in most situations. The guy is doing the driving to pick up the girl, but it's true for the girl as well. She doesn't need to go out. She doesn't need to have that whole, the awkwardness of the car, of that whole piece of it, and you save the time of it. And of course, you also save money. Now, having said that, since normally, and this was said last week, so it's somewhat, as I was preparing this had come to mind right away, it's obvious. Then when I watched last week's video, they had talked about it, but nevertheless, I think it bears repeating, and maybe there are people here who didn't see last week's presentation, but ordinarily when we're dating, we're in some venue and there is some distraction. It takes some of the time, it takes some of the attention, takes some of the focus away. And therefore, it's possible to have a longer date and it doesn't get too heavy. in a Zoom situation, there are no outside distractions. You're totally on screen the whole time. You need to be present the whole time, which I'll address a little bit more in a moment. And because of that, it's so much more intense. So even a shorter date is okay. And as a matter of fact, given the amount of stress and the possibility of the date really going south, you should begin initially from the start. Last week, they recommended a first date, not more than 45 minutes. If it's really going well and you didn't even notice and you passed 45 minutes and it's working, great. Otherwise, 45 minutes is a good guideline to look at it as a maximum on a first date. If you notice, I have the background of my screen. It has the Rebbetzins. Because of that, there might be some sparkling around my image because my computer doesn't have enough processing power to really render it properly. Keep in mind, though, when you're doing a Zoom date, whatever is in the room with you is going to be seen by the other party. So when normally you're thinking of presentation, you want to be properly groomed, etc., over here, you also have to consider what's going to appear on camera. And you need to make sure that there aren't things behind you that perhaps don't reflect well on you or are not really what you want to put forward on your first date. Dress up for the date. Now, when I say that, you know, I'm wearing a suit and tie, right? You know I'm wearing a suit and tie, you see it on camera. So a lot of times there's a temptation. People will put on a suit and tie and then wear jeans, wear loafers, no shoes. Who's gonna know? I'm on camera, you don't know what I'm wearing. Now, I'm saying despite that, dress up. For the women, obviously, you're gonna get fully made up because you're not going to go on a date without grooming yourself properly. I'm saying even for the guys, even though you're only half on screen, when you're dressed in a suit, it makes you feel that you're in a more formal place. You're in a more appropriate form of dress. It doesn't have to be a suit, by the way. I'm saying suit because that's the way I tend to dress for business, and therefore I do that to project professionalism. It could be you never wear a suit. It could be you never wear a suit on a date. Whatever you would normally wear on a date, dressed up the way you normally would on a date, that's what you should do. Don't wear sweatpants with whatever you would normally wear on the date because you won't feel the same and therefore you won't be as likely to project the same way. So you need to get yourself in the game. One of the ways you get yourself in the game is you get yourself totally dressed up. Dating via video is real dating. Don't look at it as speed dating. There was someone who had said, given feedback that sometimes it could feel that way. It shouldn't be taken any less any less seriously or less intense. It can and should be a full regular date. When you're on camera, it does require more focus because when you're on camera the whole time. I am a therapist. So now I'm doing a lot of my therapy sessions are done via Zoom. And what I'm discovering is even though I'm always present, I'm always focused, but I could see my image on the screen and I know that people are only looking at the screen. They're not glancing elsewhere because that's the nature of a video conference. So I need to be fully focused every moment of every session with every client. And I've heard from others as well. It is an effort. It's an effort that even though I always focus, I find that it still needs more effort on my part because ordinarily a client will glance away from me and they won't do that now. And when you're dating, normally your date will at times look around the room. That's also useful. Sometimes that triggers a topic of conversation. It triggers something of interest or reminds you of something. You could talk about something else. Over here, you constantly need to be fully involved with the date. So that's very important. And it actually has an upside because in the more right-wing yeshiva type dating situations, they tend to spend a lot of time talking about serious topics, learning really about what the other person is about. In a Zoom date, you may get more of that more quickly because you need to be there and present the whole time. At the same time, even though it does lend itself to this more intense, you're going to have to figure out ways to lower the intensity and at times to be have more fun and to be able to share things more easily and also just to lighten things. So I have some suggestions for that as well. Some are my own suggestions. Some I've heard from other people. The dating card games that are played, they're easily played online. There are also certain board games that have online versions that you could play an online version of a board game. So you're each logging in together and you're playing against each other or with each other. Another thing that you could do, and some of these require a little preparation. You may in Zoom, there's the ability to share your screen. You could share a clip, a short clip, and it's something that is of interest to you and then something you could talk about. So that's something that really doesn't, on a date, normally to take out your phone and start showing a clip, but over here, there might be the possibility of doing that. You could also either prepare ahead of time or jointly visit a museum, see art together, share poetry. That I heard from somebody. I'm not into poetry, but someone came up with that idea. And if that's what you're into, someone came up with the idea of perhaps cooking something together separately, which could be a lot of fun. Okay, so, but it would require planning. You have to make sure that you each have the ingredients. And then you could do that casually. So you have your phone set up or your computer set up in the kitchen, and you're both cooking together separately. Overall, when you're Zoom dating, when you're video dating, it requires planning. Yes, the dates can be shorter, but you need a plan. As Rabbi Portowicz already pointed out, because of the fact that it's so intense, sometimes you need to have a plan A and a plan B and a plan C, things that you know that you could talk about. Be creative. There's a lot of opportunity in video dating to in a creative way, to have a good time, to get to know each other, and also to make it light in some ways. Just a few other things about the dating. These are general dating things. They're definitely even more important in a Zoom situation. Open-ended questions. Ask questions that require more than a one-word answer. When we ask questions that can be just answered with a yes and what, you go to college? Yes. What are you studying? Accounting. Do you like it? It's yes or no. That's it. You just, okay. And then it feels like you're interrogating the person or asking 21 questions. But you could say, oh, you're in school. What are you studying? Accounting. Oh, what do you like best about it? What led you to that field? Those are open-ended questions. They require a couple of sentences to answer. And then it's very important, and this varies by your personality. If you're the type of person that could talk to anyone, you could talk to a doorknob, you could go on and on for 15 minutes on any topic, then when you're dating and your date asks you something, think of your answers in terms of a sentence. Try to only answer with one sentence. If you're the talkative type, trying to answer with one sentence, you're probably going to say 2 to 3 sentences. If you're a quiet person, then think in terms of paragraphs. So if someone asks you a question and you tend to be quiet, try to answer with a paragraph. You'll probably end up with the same 2 to 3 sentences, and that'll give the person the sense that you're with them, that you're sharing, that you're participating in the conversation. As far as things that can be done if you decide not to date for now, or even if you are dating. In general, we in the field, we talk about the fact, and I do marital counseling as well, I do couples counseling, and we talk about water finding its level some people say, people tend to marry others at about the same psychological and emotional development as themselves. Generally, if a couple comes in for counseling and they're in trouble and he tends to be very depressed, it's not that she's necessarily going to be depressed, but she has some challenge as well. Couples in general, people will be attracted to people that are about in a similar position as them on this mental health spectrum, on the personal development spectrum. If you're very much into growth and personal development and you're a growing person, chances are you're going to be attracted to someone else like that. If you have flaws and things about you that really need fixing, generally the person you're going to end up with is going to be more or less somewhere also. They may not have the same flaw you have. They'll just have a different flaw. Okay, so they say that marriage is not a repair shop. The only problem that getting married fixes is the problem of being single. I don't remember who that quote is from. It's not my original thought. It's very true. So whether or not you're putting dating on hold, it's a good idea to go to a mentor, to a close friend, to someone you respect, and ask them, is there something about me that you think I should work on to improve before I continue my dating process, or as I continue my dating process? Is there something I ought to be working on? And then listen to what they have to say. If you can, listen non-defensively. Just listen and get the guidance you need in what you need to work on. Very, very important, because the more improved you become, the better the prospect that you'll find yourself attracted to, and that will be attracted to you. And ultimately, dating is not about dating. The goal of dating is not dating. The goal of dating is not to get engaged. The goal of dating is to get to the happily ever after part and to have a successful marriage. That's the goal of dating. I have more to say about that, but I'm wondering, Rabbi Leifer, if we should pause and take questions.
You could do that if you'd like. I noticed there was a question earlier that said, how should we assess someone's midos, like through doing a Zoom? It's hard, when you're in person, you could see the way they act to things and there's much more interactions, but how would you judge that, through a Zoom?
Right. Okay, thank you for the question. It is more difficult to assess someone when you're meeting them in an isolated place. Oftentimes when we're dating and you're walking in a venue, or you're traveling together, and you see how the person interacts with outside situations. When you're meeting only via Zoom, so it's isolated to just the two of you, then you need to listen to what they're saying. Rabbi Portowicz made the suggestion of listening to what they're doing as the time in isolation grows, and to hear what they're doing. You could also listen to what people say as they describe their family relationships, as they describe their relationships with coworkers or friends or fellow students if they're still in school. And you need to pay attention and then ask follow-up questions. If someone's telling a story, they're telling about an incident that happened, when they were with their roommate or when they were in school, and then just take an interest in them and listen to what they're saying. A lot of times people reveal a lot about themselves when we pay attention to what they're saying. It's sort of what I do professionally, but it happens to be something we all do. We all listen. Hopefully we all listen. When we choose to listen, then we could really get a sense of what's going on with somebody. By the way, it was mentioned last week, I'll mention it again. Zoom dating can take you all the way to pre-engagement. Probably not a good idea to get engaged until you've actually had at least one date face-to-face. It might mean that if you're just meeting someone for the first time now, you have the next few months of the isolation time to get to know them, etc. And then you'll have the opportunity to meet them again. But again, there is a lot that can be learned just from listening to what a person is saying and to how they're saying it. I see that there are a lot of questions in the chat. If someone, Rabbi Leifer, if you've seen.
Yeah, so one, I think you just addressed, someone wanted to know how many dates on a Zoom should one go on with somebody, so that
I would suggest also, we're isolated, and so we may not have enough to fill up our time. It's not a good idea to therefore date 6 times in a week. A lot of times when we date too intensely, we could lose our sense of perspective on the one hand, and on the other hand, sometimes it doesn't allow for a proper reflectiveness, or also for the person to digest what we're about. So I'm not saying, in the olden, back when I was dating, that was a long time ago, they would talk about dating only once a week. I don't think that you should only see each other once a week, but pace yourself.
There's another question over here is, how should we know whether to date, because we cannot wait forever to improve ourselves. We could also keep working on ourselves to become the best, version of ourselves, but we also need to eventually, to move on and to get married. So how do you, when do you decide that it's time?
Good question. So in general, we should always be in growth mode of always trying to work on ourselves. That's true for now when you're single. It's true during your time of dating. And I would hope that it would also be true after you're married. I often say, when people ask me, like, so when do you stop growing? I say you stop trying to improve yourself when the first shovelful of dirt hits the box and you're in the ground. Until then, you need to be continuing to work on yourself. So to say don't date because I need to work on myself is only necessary in certain specific situations. I'm saying that if in today's climate, you do not feel comfortable and confident in Zoom dating, and you're planning on putting your dating on hold, then you'll have the opportunity to spend more time to be more intensely focused on growing yourself, so that when you come back to the dating process, you'll be more prepared. What if you're anyway, let's say that the situation clears up, or you're anyway continuing to date, then you should still ask a mentor or someone you trust and feel close with for guidance as to what you should be working on, but that does not require you to stop dating unless the mentor or respected person says to you, this particular flaw, it's really something you should fix before you continue dating. There are specific types of situations where we would advise people to do that. But in most instances, the process of growth and the process of dating should take place at the same time. I saw someone asked about physical attraction. How do you gauge physical attraction on Zoom? The answer to that is you can see somewhat, you could see the person, you could get a sense of the person somewhat. Obviously, you're not going to get a full sense of the person, and that will have to leave itself for the end of the dating process. However, in a certain sense, it'll allow for a deeper decision and a deeper understanding of the other person. Physical attraction is very important. It should not be ignored, set aside, or dismissed. It is an important aspect of the dating decision. However, it should not be the only or the central decision of the dating process. The way I've had this discussion with people, and I point out to them, if the person you're dating and the person you ultimately marry, if they're kind, they'll probably be kind their entire life. If they're thoughtful and considerate, they'll probably be thoughtful and considerate their entire life. If they're bright, they'll probably be bright their entire life. If they're pretty or handsome, you know that looks are the one thing you're guaranteed are going to change for the worse over time. And to make your decision based on the least stable quality of the other person just doesn't seem like the best decision you could make. it's important. You need to be physically attracted to the other party, and you need to keep it in mind, but it shouldn't be the central point.
Another question here is, how can we refine what we are looking for in a partner?
Oh, I knew they would throw the easy questions. That's obviously that's not an easy question. So somewhat, I think that it's somewhat know thyself, know who you are. And a lot of times people have a list, and the list gets longer and longer, and it has to be not only the qualities of the person that I'm seeing, but the qualities of the family, and I need this and I need that. And generally, we are very misguided in what we think we need. So just like to give an almost ridiculous extreme example, a relative of mine, actually someone, my parents' generation, he lived in Brooklyn and he didn't drive. And he decided that he would only date girls, not only who lived in Brooklyn, but who lived in his neighborhood. He was very uncomfortable making his way around the city. He was only going to date girls who lived in his neighborhood. Ultimately, he married someone who lived in a city hundreds of miles away. Excuse me. There is a reality that many times what we think we need, we don't need. But some of it we could evaluate on our own, and sometimes we need someone else's help. I think that we should look first on our core. These are non-negotiable. This is something that truly is something. I am a person who wants to have a lot of company at the table. I don't want to marry someone who is socially very closed and just would never consider having company in the house. Okay. I've heard people say, I'm a very intellectual, bright person. I need to marry someone who's very intellectual and bright. I've met many happily married couples, successful couples, where either he or she is clearly not just a little bit, but a lot smarter and savvier than their spouse. And they're happy, loving couples who've successfully been married and raised families over decades. It's not always so clear what is a necessity and what is something I would really like to have. And a lot of times it's a good idea. I mentioned before mentors. So I'm always a little bit cautious when I say this. I don't want to sound condescending. I don't want to suggest that it's not possible for your contemporary to be your guide or advisor in these types of things. However, oftentimes when you consult with, let's say, Rabbi Leifer or Rebbetzin Serebrowski, people who have many years of experience and who not only have their own personal experience, but have seen so many different people in their dating situations and have guided them, oftentimes they are a much better source of advice and guidance than your friend who he got married, or she's already engaged and she knows she's been dating in this climate. It is true that times change, and the dating climate that myself or Rabbi Portowicz or the Rebbetzins dated in, it's different than today's climate. But human nature is human nature, and they can much better guide you at times. People like that can much better guide you as to what should or shouldn't be a core issue. They cannot tell you what's important to you. You can best know what's important to you. But then they could help you put a number on it as far as its importance. Yes, this is important to me, but on a scale of 1 to 10, I should only rate this a 3. And on a scale of 1 to 10, this should get a 9 or a 10.
Another question here is, what are some good topics to talk about on a Zoom?
Okay, so I would say it's the same topics that you would talk about otherwise. I did give you some suggestions. Generally, when I help, oftentimes, by the way, at least from many of the people who come to me for guidance, it's often considered the guy's job to come up with topics of conversation and to make sure conversation flows. I don't understand that totally. I think that it's more appropriate to say that it's both parties' job to keep conversation flowing. Nevertheless, for first dates, I give people acronyms. The two acronyms I use, they're similar. One is FISH, which is Family, Israel, School, and Hobbies. And the other one is JIFS, JIFFS, which is Job, Israel, Family, Friends, School. I think it's important not necessarily to have an acronym, but to have many topics that you've at least thought about, so that you always have something sort of in your back pocket. I've told people, let's say you go with fish. So you start talking about family, and then the other party brings up something. So, oh, no, 1 second. We didn't talk about Israel yet. I can't go to camp, summer camp. I can't talk about vacations because we didn't talk about, no, just go with what comes up, what's natural. If something is flowing, then let it flow. But when you run out of things to talk about, then you have the next topic sort of in the back of your mind. Incidentally, you notice that as we're talking, I'm glancing down. Obviously, I have notes in front of me. One of the advantages of Zoom dating is that you could have a card with notes, with topics, things that you've come up with in advance, and that could be there to remind you. Sometimes if you don't have that, if you're in a situation where you can't use notes, sometimes you forget. If you don't think that people forget, just go back to Joe Biden did a conference and his teleprompter stopped working. So go look at that clip. When we have notes in front of us, it's easier to remember what we want to talk about.
Okay, there's a lot of questions here. I don't know if we'll get enough time to go through all of them, but just another one. It seems like, I think you touched on it a little bit before also, but I guess the question is there a max that you could really get from a Zoom date? In other words, let's say you went out a bunch of times with a Zoom date, and even if it's going well, but then let's say this continues, for 2 months or whatever it is,
right?
Is there a max potential you could get out of the Zoom dating?
I believe that it's really a venue that can be used that really could get us, that could get a couple to just at the point of getting engaged. Realistically, the situation can be going on for another couple of months, but I don't believe, let's say that there's a difference between someone who's meeting someone for the first time now, this week, and a person who's already involved in a dating process with somebody. If you're already at the point of getting engaged, you're in a different situation. So let's start with someone who's just beginning now. Realistically, couples tend to date at least several months before they get engaged. By the time several months from now pass, it's reasonable to hope, obviously I can't predict it any more than anyone else, but it's reasonable to hope that the current situation would have cleared up, and it would be possible then to go directly to an in-person date, meeting each other's families, etc. You could, if dating was going really well, you could meet each other's families over Zoom. You don't have to be in the same location. It actually eases that somewhat because, you're on the screen and it could be kept a little bit shorter and there's less of the pressures involved. Dating can be successfully carried out, I believe, over Zoom. And in a certain way, it would allow for a deeper dating than otherwise, but it should not be only these intense, deep dates because I don't think any of us, maybe there are people on the call that could stand up to that kind of scrutiny and that would be comfortable with it. I personally don't think I would stand up to that kind of scrutiny, and I don't think that I would enjoy it, nor would I don't think that it works. So you have to let the relationship develop and get to that more relaxed place where we could have conversations, and they're just easier, lighter conversations. And then interspersed with that are the more serious topics. The dates could be shorter, but you could look at it the same way that you would look at in-person dating. It just happens to be the sign of the time. This is the way it is. We're living in a time where this is what's possible. So then there's nothing else to be done. Clearly, you should keep in mind that given the current situation, given the spread of the disease in most of our communities, it is possible that the person that you're dating will Hopefully this will pass quickly, and hopefully none of us will get ill and none of our families will get ill. But it's possible that someone will be distracted by themselves or a relative not being well. And this goes without saying, but make sure that you're a mensch, that if someone does have to interrupt the dating and you're not going to be seeing them over the course of time when you're not in touch, make sure to check in with them to see if everything's okay, how they're doing, how they're holding up. Even if it's required to pause the dating. I think it goes without saying, but I'm saying it anyway. And I do believe that it is possible to go almost to the point of engagement before meeting in person.
And there's another question here is, when it comes to Zoom dating, does it make sense to really do it twice? So that you could, I guess the question is, if you don't really have a good sense after the first time, maybe it's because of the Zoom, or maybe it's because it just wasn't a good date. Should you?
In general, I encourage people to try always, unless it's like a total blow, like it's terrible, it was horrible, we just hated each other, there was something about him that I couldn't tolerate, I couldn't stomach, etc. In general, I encourage people, at the very least, give a person a second shot. And the reason is because very often the person is nervous, and then they are not showing their best self on the first go, on the first date. And therefore, it's a good idea to allow for a second meeting. So I would say also that be forgiving in this process of dating through Zoom. You need to recognize it is an adjustment. If you've never done it before, it is different. And as I said before, it is definitely more intense and heavier. And because there are no distractions, it makes it so difficult. So give yourself as well as the other party a little bit of space and to develop that comfort that we could at least have things flowing. I'm going to go a little bit off on a tangent because I said give someone another chance, and I also said before about continuing to grow yourself. And last week in the Rebbetzins conference, they talked about going back to check the list of people you've dated before and consider whether you should date them again. So I think that I would share with you a story that I've said before. It was said publicly, so by the person involved. So I'm going to share it, and I'll tell you then who it happened to. But someone shared that when he was dating, he was a terribly shy person, and he had a very difficult time in just being comfortable talking to people. He was set up on a date with a girl, and they went out, and she said, he's too quiet, and it's just not for me. And he tried to one more time, and I'm going to be more talkative, and I'll be more out there. And she said, no, it's not for me. And he pushed the shadchan to try to restart the process. And the girl said, he's not, I can't marry a guy who's so quiet, it just doesn't work for me. So shidduch was off, and they went their separate ways, and they continued to date. And then several years passed, and they were set up on a date by a shadchan who they didn't recognize, they didn't realize who they were being set up with. Neither party knew who it was. And then suddenly they realized that they have a date with the other one, and it's this person that they went out with before. And the girl felt at that point that once she had already said yes, and even though she wasn't at all interested in seeing this guy again, she had already met him and said no to him, and she really didn't have an interest, but she decided that it wouldn't be polite to just shut him down. So she decided to allow the date to happen again. They went out again, and this time it was different. And they dated, and they successfully dated, and they got married. And they are a wonderful couple. You may know them from the Zone. It's Rabbi and Mrs. Davidowitz. Rabbi and Mrs. D, who are that terrific. They clearly have a wonderful marriage and have raised Kanai Nahar, a large family. When Rabbi D told this story, he said, she was right to turn me down the first time around. I really was too quiet for her. But between the first time I dated her and when I dated her again, I had left yeshiva, I had founded a school. And in my work at the school, I had to interact with the parents. And I changed. I learned how to talk to people. I pushed myself and I became more outgoing, more able to talk. The second time we dated, Rabbi D said, we were a better match for each other. So it's give a person a chance. They're being quiet, but maybe they're being quiet because they're not comfortable in this venue. It is something new for all of us. So maybe they're being quiet because they're not comfortable in the venue. Maybe they're being quiet. You haven't yet gotten a flow going. Work on it. Give it a second shot. And then if it doesn't work, then you'll know after the second time. But keep in mind this idea that I said, sometimes someone that's not a good match for you now may become a good match for you later. Okay? So keep that in mind. You also, the idea that Rabbi D said, he continued to live and to grow and to change. And by continuing to change, he became the person that was a good match for Mrs. D.
Okay, there's another question here. Should we be more flexible on the type of people we are dating during this time of Zoom?
Okay. I'll address the question, Rabbi Liefer. I think that you had said that someone else was going to be having a Zoom conference at 9 p.m. So would this be the end of the conference?
It's up to you. If you have extra time, I thought if you have.
Okay, I will have to go. So let me address the question. Should we change our standards? So I would say it's not a question about a Zoom date. Whatever criteria you're using to choose a potential partner, that's a criterion. Those criteria should be applied in this situation as well. You may want to, given the what we talked about in the beginning, you may want to reassess, what are my criteria in choosing a partner? Do I have thoughts that maybe I need to broaden what I'm looking for? Maybe I need to narrow, maybe I need to just change directions. So because of that, you may want to change, but to say that I'm going to change because I'm dating in a Zoom environment, I don't see that that's a reason to change. I think that oftentimes, when as a therapist, it comes the times of the Chagim. So the Pesach time comes, and generally clients will pause their therapy because they get busy before the holiday. Then over the holiday, I'm not working. And then afterwards, they come back. They don't necessarily come back right away. Sometimes we miss 2 to 3 sessions. I always take that before the holiday. Last time we're meeting beforehand, I talk to them about, being aware, focus, and observe themselves during that period of time. And whenever they begin again, I always set goals all over again and talk about what are we doing, where are we? And because I find that just having a break and taking a step back allows for a certain clarity of thought about the process. In the same way, our lives have been put on hold. Rabbi Portowicz talked about the fact, with our lives put on hold, reassessing ourselves, reassessing our world, reassessing our priorities, etc., etc. At the same time, it's not a bad idea to reassess what you're doing in dating. It's probably a good idea to do that periodically anyway. If you've found yourself dating for a long time, then it may be a good idea anyway to periodically hit pause, at least not necessarily pause the dating, but internally in your own head, and then ask yourself, what am I doing? Am I going about this properly? I will tell you, in my practice, at times I'm contacted by older singles, or sometimes family members of older singles, parents sometimes, and I'll have someone come in they're 30 years old. They've been dating 7 years. They're 28, 32. And they want to just get a sort of an evaluation, like what's going on. And I have to tell you that many times I meet the people and I talk to them, I listen to them, I hear what they're doing, I hear what their thought process is. And oftentimes I tell them, what you're doing is correct. It sounds like you have everything thought through. It sounds like you're following the process properly. You have not yet met the one that's meant for you. Not every person who is dating a long time or finding the dating process to be lengthy and difficult, it's terrible to in addition to the pain of being wanting to be married and being single, in addition to the loneliness, in addition to the pain of the process, to also feel that others are judging you, that's just like adding actually injury to insult or insult to injury. I'm not sure which would be the right way of saying it. So you're not necessarily doing it wrong. You're not necessarily looking for the wrong criteria. You're not necessarily, there may not be anything wrong with what you're doing, but a wise person periodically anyway stops to think about what they're doing and just review. And then it's a good idea, as I said earlier, to check with a mentor. I'm just going to end. I do have to go. I just want to end with something to give you hope. And I've said this before publicly. I had asked I had asked the people involved if it's okay to say this over. I had a daughter. She actually had been a counselor in the zone, but she was dating, and she had been dating a while, and things were just not going. And then she hit a dry spell where literally for 18 months, she did not have a serious suggestion. And we were reaching out to people. We spoke to Shadchanim. We called people. We took her to meet people. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that over a period of 18 months, periodically we would hear from the people on her resume that they had received calls, but we were not getting any calls. And we did not have a single suggestion, not a viable suggestion, not just that we checked out and it didn't work. We did not have a single suggestion for 18 months. I don't know why, but it happened. And then Hashem has a sense of humor, and we got a call, and a shadchan suggested a guy, and it just happened to be, we had planned a family trip to Israel. We were all going, all of us were going to Israel, and we were going to be away for a week and a half to 2 weeks. And I started the research process. We were looking into this fellow, but it wasn't possible to finish the process before we went. And I called the shadchan back, and I said, I really appreciate your suggestion. We are interested. I cannot give you a yes yet because I haven't finished the process. We have this long planned vacation and we're going to be away. But please convey to the other party that we will get back to them when we get back from Israel. We got back from Israel within a couple of days. I was able to reach the people I needed to reach. It was a go. And within just a month or two after that, they were engaged. Baruch Hashem, they're happily married with 2 children. Sometimes we're sitting here and we're feeling so down. We're feeling so broken. Maybe you're new to the dating process. Maybe you've been at this a long time. And maybe you've had many dates and maybe you've had very few. Either way, sometimes we get discouraged. Sometimes we feel like, when will it end? Why me? Why am I stuck in this situation? And it doesn't seem like it just, I just feel like it'll never happen. And I'm telling you that despite the fact that we're talking about Zoom dating and we're talking about it has to be longer term and you're going to have to wait till the crisis ends and the quarantine ends, etc. But you, each and every one of you, who are hearing this right now, you can be 1 month, 2 months from now, you could be at the cusp of getting engaged and getting married and getting to that happily ever after. Never give up hope. We have a wonderful Hashem who looks out for us. He's there, and he has that one planned for you. The one that is going, when you're going to meet them and you're going to marry them and you're going to have that life, you're going to realize it was all worth the wait. And everything before that was preparation. Right now it seems very dark, but we just entered the month of Nisan, the time of spring, the time of rejuvenation, of flourishing and flowering. And Hashem should help that every single person who's looking for a shidduch should find the right one, and Hashem should protect us all and all of humanity from the current situation, from the current illness, that nobody more should die from this illness, and we should quickly have the vaccine and the medicine necessary so that everybody will remain safe and healthy. Chag Kosher v'Sameach.